Are you aware that Bob Ross is capable of filming an entire season of his show, The Joy of Painting, in just 2 days? The artist was incredible in every way, from brushstrokes that turned mistakes into happy accidents, to a voice that pulled people who were suffering from insomnia into a state of peaceful sleep. Nevertheless, Ross's life was marred by a tragedy that caused his fans to feel a sense of outrage, despite the fact that he presented himself on television as a happy hippie. We are going to delve into the life story of Bob Ross today, beginning with his peaceful episodes and ending with the battles that he dealt with privately. To have a complete understanding of the tragic life that Bob Ross led, it is necessary to quickly examine his childhood. On October 29, 1942, Ross was born in Daytona Beach, Florida. His mother, Ollie, worked as a waitress, and his father, Jack, was a carpenter. Ross was raised by his mother and father. His compassion for animals, which he displayed when he was a young boy, was later featured in his television show. He quit school in the 9th grade to work as a carpenter with his father, but he was involved in an accident that caused him to lose a portion of his left index finger. To his good fortune, it did not have any impact on his ability to paint. Ross enlisted in the Air Force in 1961 and remained in the service for a total of 20 years. Because of his height and flat feet, he was unable to pursue a career as a pilot, which resulted in him working at a desk job. He stood out at 6 feet and 2 inches. The nickname Bust-em-Up Bobby was given to Ross as a result of his strict management style, which led to his promotion to the rank of Master Sergeant. After completing his military service, he vowed to become a more gentle person because he did not enjoy playing this role. While Ross was stationed in Alaska, he discovered that he had a passion for painting landscapes, which eventually became his favorite subject to paint. In the 1960s, he began his artistic journey by enrolling in painting classes. However, it wasn't until 1975, when he watched William Alexander's The Magic of Oil Painting, that his passion for painting was truly ignited. Alexander's wet-on-wet technique, which allowed paintings to be completed in a short amount of time by applying oil paint to wet layers, was something that Ross admired extremely. This method, which is perfect for television, motivated Ross to sell his paintings of Alaskan landscapes on a regular basis, and eventually led him to leave the military in order to pursue art on a full-time basis. Soon after, he started making more money from the sale of his paintings than he did from his service in the military. In order to supplement the money he made in the military, he worked in taverns, and it was there that he painted, although the majority of his paintings were on gold panning tins. Additionally, it assisted him in improving his painting skills and taught him how to paint in a short amount of time. Not only did Ross sell paintings, but he also gave demonstrations, which added to the appeal of his art. People were amazed to see him painting and creating art right in front of them, which added to the appeal of his work. After serving in the military for 20 years, Ross would eventually retire in 1981 and then go in search of Alexander, whom he had been watching on television with a devoted eye up until that point. The fact that he had such a strong desire to learn the art form led to him becoming Alexander's most talented student. That did not pay very well, and even though he was able to secure a few paid lessons as a painting instructor, the additional income was not even close to being sufficient for him to survive. In an effort to reduce the amount of money he spent on haircuts, Ross adopted his signature afro. Instead of getting a perm, he decided to let his hair grow out. As he got older, he made up his mind that he would never cut it off again because it had become distinctive to his appearance. In spite of the fact that he did not like the hairstyle and felt as though he was unable to change it, he was unable to cut it off because it had become an essential component of his identity as a painter and a man. Both Ross's hair and his style gave off the impression of being a lovable hippie. With a calm speaking voice that bordered on intimacy and almost always dressed in denim shirts and jeans, he gave the impression to the viewers that they were participating in a one-on-one painting session with him. This was the case despite the fact that he was able to attract a large number of viewers with each episode of his show. Ross possessed a magnetic effect that became more and more endearing to his followers with each episode that they watched. The man who maintained his composure, with his calming influence and his references to clouds and trees that were joyful. Many people found that watching him paint was more than just a way to learn about art. Additionally, It was therapeutic. One of Alexander's traveling instructors, Ross, eventually earned his certificate as a traveling instructor after becoming one of Alexander's clients. After some time, Ross began using this technique for painting. However, during the initial years of his painting career, he did not see the same level of financial success as he had hoped for. Ross's show, The Joy of Painting, made its debut on the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, in 1983. It went on to air for a total of 11 years, which is 3 years longer than his predecessor's show and significantly more successful. In his personal life, Bob Ross did not experience any difficulties. However, his life did not have the same level of tranquility and upbeat attitude that he portrayed on his show. The 3 marriages that Ross had resulted in the birth of 2 children. While he was still a teenager, he gave birth to his first child. However, there is not a lot of information available about that child. Vivian Ridge, his first wife, gave birth to his second child, Robert Stephen Ross, also known as Steve Ross. Steve Ross was the product of his relationship with Vivian Ridge. It was alleged that Ross's extramarital affair was the cause of the couple's divorce in the year 1977. Shortly after the conclusion of his first marriage, Ross wed Jane, who would later become his second wife. In addition to being content in their relationship, the two would go on to become business partners up until the time of her passing in 1992. Their marriage did not result in the birth of any children, which is a great disappointment. Linda Brown became Ross's third wife in 1995, 2 months before he passed away. The wedding took place in 1995. A number of hypotheses have been proposed regarding the reasons behind his marriage to her. In spite of the fact that he had already established himself as a prominent figure in the public eye, Ross chose to maintain his privacy regarding his personal life. An encounter with the Kowalskis. Ross's first encounter with the Kowalskis occurred when Annette Kowalski attended a painting class that Ross held as a means of coping with his own difficult circumstances. She was in a state of intense grief over the death of her son at the time, and she was looking for a way to get away from her suffering. Due to the fact that she was captivated by the manner in which Ross painted, she would find that Ross's class was precisely what she required. With a knack for business and the connections necessary to be successful in it, Walt Kowalski, a retired CIA agent, was married to Annette. Annette was Walt Kowalski's wife. Their interaction with Ross resulted in the production of the television show The Joy of Painting, which allowed Ross to achieve the celebrity status he would later enjoy as a direct result of the show. In 1983, the program The Joy of Painting was developed, and it was picked up by public television stations all over the country. Over the course of 11 years, it would be broadcast on the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, and in 1984, Bob Ross Inc. Kowalskis and Rosses were the ones who initiated the venture. Annette and her husband Walt were considered to be partners on an equal footing with Bob and his wife Jane. They were successful in establishing the ideal channel through which to disseminate the significance of art all over the world, as the show was able to be broadcast on 277 stations on a daily basis, thereby reaching more than 80 million individuals. This, however, did not sit well with his former mentor, William Alexander, who had instructed him in the wet-on-wet technique. Alexander had made use of this technique on his show, which ultimately resulted in Alexander being forced out of business. As far as Alexander was concerned, Ross's behavior was a betrayal that he had not anticipated. Not only had his student stolen from him, but he had also demonstrated to the entire world that he was capable of doing it better, which was an act that bothered the mentor. Despite the fact that Alexander asserts that he was the one who invented the wet-on-wet technique, the painting style has been around since Caravaggio, who was well known for his use of oil colors in his paintings. Despite his best efforts, Alexander was unable to determine precisely what it was that led people to attend Ross's show. Not because of the painting style, although it was helpful that he could complete a painting in half an hour before the show ended, it was not because of the painting style. In spite of this, it was Bob's personality, his soothing and sensual tone, and his ability to calm even the most restless minds and get them to follow along with his painting sessions that made the difference. There was no difference between the fact that they were painting at home themselves or that they were simply watching as a way to pass the time in a leisurely manner. The same could not be said about Alexander, which is a great disappointment. The strong German accent that he had, which made it difficult for him to pronounce English words, did not elicit the same feelings that Ross was famous for. People who watched Ross's painting show did, in fact, experience joy as a result of his work. Through the process of learning to paint with him as a friend, he had established an environment in which individuals were free to simply be themselves. Every person who had a genuine interest in painting would have had no trouble learning Bob Ross's painting style and would have been able to replicate it with relative ease. However, what they were unable to replicate was his personality, as well as the genuine and sincere sentiment that was conveyed through his voice and actions. In an episode of his show, Ross painted only in gray tones after he was approached by a fan of his work who wanted to paint, but was unable to do so due to the fact that he was colorblind and could only see in gray tones. It was clear that he was not in it for the money, but rather because he genuinely enjoyed what he did, as evidenced by the fact that his sympathy for his followers attracted even more viewers to his show and had people singing his praise. Ross made use of the half an hour that each episode was broadcast to paint, making sure to keep his viewers interested by guiding them through the process and even providing them with entertaining commentary on occasion. In an effort to make his show even more engaging for his audience, Ross continued to look for new ways to do so. One of these ways was to invite his pet squirrel, Peapod, to appear on the show as a special guest. It was decided that Peapod would continue to make an appearance on the show because the audience found this to be very entertaining. Surprisingly, Ross was never compensated for any of the episodes that ever aired on the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, show, despite the fact that the show received high ratings and aired a total of 403 episodes. You did not have to pay for any of them. Nevertheless, Ross was able to acquire his wealth through other means. They were interested in expanding the show and gaining publicity for their company, Beer Eye, which they owned but operated. By using the name Bob Ross, the company was able to market instructional books, videos, and art supplies. Additionally, he provided painting workshops that were led by instructors who had been professionally trained in his wet-on-wet painting technique. They had made a sacrifice, and it had paid off by 1991. A company that had been established with the intention of achieving a certain goal had evolved into a business that generates $15 million annually. However, in contrast to the Kowalskis, Ross did not place a high value on the money that was earned. Rather than that, he was more interested in developing a platform that would allow people to learn art in a manner similar to what he had done and provide them with high-quality products while they were learning the craft. More than anything else, the Kowalskis were concerned with maximizing profits, even if that meant taking shortcuts. The phrase, "money has a way of bringing out people's true personalities," is one that is frequently used, and in the case of Ross and the Kowalskis, this would not be too far from the truth. Regrettable occurrences. As the years passed and the partners' relationships continued to develop, rumors began to spread about the dynamics of their relationship. These rumors were about the partners' relationship dynamics. An affair between Ross and Annette was said to be going on behind their backs, according to whispers. Nevertheless, the Kowalski family stated that it was nothing more than rumors. After a number of years had passed, however, Steve Ross, Ross's son, would bring it up once more, implying that it was, in fact, true. Jane, Ross's wife, passed away from cancer in 1992, which was the beginning of the problems that began to arise from what had been a peaceful relationship between the business partners. During the process of establishing the company, the business partners had reached an agreement in the form of a contract that, in the event of the passing of one of the partners, their share of the company's shares would be distributed in an equal manner among the three business partners who were still in existence, rather than being transferred to their respective relationship partners. As a result of the passing of Ross's wife and the consequent distribution of her shares among the other shareholders, Ross had become a minority vote in a business that made money off of his name and his reputation in the public eye. While John D., according to Rockefeller, a friendship that is founded on business is superior to a business that is founded on friendship. It was the passing of Jane that served as the impetus for Ross's life to demonstrate that these words were accurate. During the 11 years that the show was broadcast, Ross had a number of special guests, including people and animals. However, there was one guest who stood out from the rest: his son, Steve. He was more special than any of the other guests. Ross never stopped inviting his son to come to the show and paint with him throughout the entire show. During the time that Steve was dazzling the audience with his painting, he would occasionally sit and make brief commentary, occasionally dropping hints that revealed his true intentions. When it came time for Ross to resign from his position on the show, he was making preparations for his son to take over his responsibilities. However, despite the fact that Steve was a talented artist in his own right, as demonstrated by the paintings he created both on the show and outside of it, he did not have any interest in following in his father's footsteps and taking after him. For Ross, his son was an excellent painter, and he was confident that he would be able to continue with the show in the event that it was required. Nevertheless, Steve did not experience the same thing. Both of them would experience strain in their relationship as a result of the pressure of following in his father's footsteps. An altercation took place between the two, and as a consequence, they did not communicate with one another for a number of years. Unfortunately, the two would continue to be estranged for a considerable amount of time, and they would not communicate with one another again until Ross was diagnosed with lymphoma, which was only a few weeks after the passing of his wife. During a subsequent interview, Steve expressed his regret over the decision he had made to not continue his father's work from where he had initially left off. Ross continued to do what he loved the most, which was spreading joy one painting episode at a time, despite the fact that his illness had decreased his physical strength and the diagnosis had diminished his mental strength. As Ross continued to create videos, he eventually reached a point where he could no longer muster the strength to get out of bed in the morning, let alone paint for 30 minutes straight. Ross was able to keep his diagnosis a secret from the entire crew that he worked with, while he continued to spread joy and laughter with his jokes and stories while he painted. This was accomplished despite the fact that he was carrying a ticking time bomb inside of him. Ross continued to work on his painting, increasing the number of episodes he produced each day to approximately 3 or 4. This was done with the knowledge that his death was drawing near. In addition to the fact that he wished to have more episodes available for his audience after his passing, he also used it as a way to divert his attention away from the issue that he was facing. Unfortunately for him, the individuals whom he had previously considered to be his friends were no longer committed to supporting him. As opposed to the loss of a life, they were more concerned about the disadvantages that would befall them as a result of his passing. You wouldn't be able to find Bob Ross Inc. in the absence of the individual whose identity initiated the brand. With regard to them, the most important thing was to find a solution to their problem so that they could continue to make money off of the brand even after his death, which was unavoidable. As the end of the story drew closer, the Kowalskis became increasingly desperate to find a solution to their predicament. The Kowalskis had become his worst nightmare, and there was nothing any of him could do to change the situation, with the exception of one thing. Ross concluded the series with parting words that no one could have possibly known were messages signaling goodbye. The series consisted of 403 episodes, which is equivalent to 13 shows. Beginning on January 11, 1983, the show ran until it was canceled in 1994. One of Ross's aspirations was to become the host of a television show, and in 1995, towards the end of his life, he was able to accomplish this goal by making an appearance on the show Elmer and Friends. Unfortunately, this would put an even greater strain on his relationship with the Kowalskis, which was already beginning to deteriorate with time. Now that they were higher shareholders in the company, they believed that they had reserved control of the company and of him because he was the figure who represented the company. During his appearance on the show, Ross wore a wig to conceal the fact that his hair was already beginning to thin. The Kowalskis were under the impression that members of the audience would become aware of his illness as a consequence, which would have a negative impact on their business. Instead of trying to appease the Kowalskis and their desire for financial gain, Ross continued with the show, making the decision to make the children happy and to fulfill his lifelong goal of hosting a television show. The Kowalskis were able to discern that Ross's time was approaching sooner than they had anticipated, and they would be required to take action in order to ensure that they would be able to take advantage of the profits that the company had started to generate. Annette Kowalski paid a visit to the Ross family while he was on his deathbed. However, the visit was certainly not a friendly one. She went to Steve with the intention of convincing him to sign a contract that would assist them in establishing a memorial for Ross after he passed away. She was armed with a contract that stated Ross would have signed his name and the use of his likeness over to them. Since the news of his illness broke, Steve has been appalled by their sudden change in behavior towards his father. As a result, he has refused to take the contract to his father, who is ill. In spite of the fact that Annette had not signed the contract when she returned home, the Kowalski family had not abandoned their intention to acquire all of the resources that were associated with the artist. They became even more agitated with each passing day that went by without him signing the document. Above and beyond the act of obtaining a single signature on a piece of paper, Ross's life was of no significance to them. These individuals placed a higher value on his legacy and likeness than they did on the individual himself. Calls were made to the Ross household on a regular basis by the Kowalskis, who showed no concern for the dying man who had gone to bed in order to spend his final days of tranquility before making his departure from this world. During an interview, Steve recalled that his father, who was supposed to be calm, became increasingly agitated with each phone call. There were many occasions when he would hear him yelling in his room, saying things like, "You're not getting my name, I'm not giving you my name." While Ross made every effort to preserve the things that were most important to him, including avoiding the Kowalskis for as long as he could not have possibly anticipated the events that would take place after his passing. Life after Bob Ross passed away on July 4th, 1995, at the age of 52, as a result of complications arising from lymphoma. He had not been particularly taken aback by the news of Ross's passing. The majority of his adult life was spent as a cigarette smoker because he had given in to the addiction to nicotine and smoked cigarettes. Throughout his life, he had struggled with a number of health issues, and he had anticipated that he would pass away sooner rather than later. Woodlawn Memorial Park in Gotha, Florida, was the location where he was laid to rest. Ross had kept his diagnosis a secret from the general public, similarly to how he had kept every aspect of his personal life a secret. Only his immediate family and close friends were aware of his passing. Even the general public would not learn of his passing until a significant amount of time had passed after he had been laid to rest. Despite the fact that he had been nothing more to them than a business opportunity, the Kowalskis were more concerned about what the knowledge of his death would do to their company than they were about the fact that they had lost someone who had once considered them to be friends. This was true even after he had passed away. Due to the fact that the details of his passing were kept a secret, the attendees at his funeral numbered only about 40 people. There was no sign of the Kowalskis being present. As a result of the terms of their agreement, the Kowalskis were able to acquire complete ownership of Bob Ross Inc. now that Ross had been removed from the equation. Even though the Kowalskis had been successful in getting what they desired, it was not sufficient. As soon as Ross passed away, it was only a matter of time before the general public learnt about it, which resulted in them losing the advantage they had previously enjoyed. In light of the fact that the man whose face the company was built upon had passed away, Annette and Walt desired more than just the company itself. There was no way to keep the business operation going. In the event that they were unable to acquire the right to his name and likeness, there would be no other viable option. When the Kowalskis wanted to use Ross's name for merchandising, they were unable to do so until they owned the rights to his name. This was the motivation behind their interest. They thought it would be best to go the aggressive route. In spite of the fact that Ross had not resisted the weight of their pressure and had signed over the rights to his estate prior to his passing, they were now going to obtain it through the legal process. Ross had left his estate, as well as the rights to his name and likeness, to his son Steve and his half-brother, Jimmy Cox. He had also left the Kowalskis as part of his will and testament. On the other hand, despite the fact that this ought to have been sufficient to shield them from the Kowalskis and their plotting, they were about to be confronted with more than they could have ever hoped for. When Ross was working for Bob Ross Inc., the Kowalskis challenged his will and asserted that they were the rightful owners of everything that Ross had acquired during that time. The Kowalskis had done their homework and were prepared to give it their all, or risk losing everything. Steve recalled a phone call he received from Annette 2 days after the passing of his father. In the call, Annette informed him that he would never be able to establish a business involving painting under the name Bob Ross. Steve's conversation with Annette was included in an interview that he had. In the event that it was not connected to painting, he was free to engage in any other activity he desired. At the end of his life, Ross had done everything in his power to ensure that the Kowalskis would never end up with his intellectual properties, including his name and likeness. He had made it a point to address these concerns in his will, He even went so far as to marry his third wife, a nurse whom he had met while he was in the hospital. However, this would not be able to stop what was going to happen in the future. In order to obtain Ross's estate, the Kowalskis filed a lawsuit against his third wife as well as his half-brother. They wanted everything that he had worked on and worked with, from the paintings that he had created to the paintbrushes that he had used to create the artwork. They wanted everything. There was a wave of lawsuits filed by the Kowalskis. Not only did they file a lawsuit against the Ross family, but they also filed a lawsuit against WIPB-TV, the public television station that had been the host of the Joy of Painting show, as well as a children's television program that was broadcast on the public television network. When Bob was nearing the end of his life in 1995, he had been performing the same children's show that he had been doing all along. Despite the fact that Ross had made an appearance in a green screen because he had become too weak to travel at the time, the Kowalskis were not deterred by this fact. As soon as they were finished, they had almost everything that was relevant to Ross in their possession. Is this to be the final chapter in the Ross family's story? On the other hand, would they discover a way to fight back and regain everything that they had lost? Steve's frustration stemmed from the fact that he had lost his father and everything else that was important to him. Fear had been instilled in him as a result of the Kowalskis and their intention to file a lawsuit against anyone who threatened them. After consulting with his attorney, Steve made the decision to file a lawsuit against them before they could discover anything else that they could take from him. During the course of his investigation, he looked for anything that could provide evidence that he was the rightful owner of his father's name, and he was successful in locating it. His father had made preparations for that, but Steve was about to have a rude awakening because of the preparations that his father had made. Jimmy Cox, who had been appointed guardian of Steve because he was not old enough to be legally responsible for his actions, had signed some documents in order to get rid of the lawsuit that they were facing. Unfortunately, this meant that he had given Bob Ross Inc. full ownership of all associated rights. They had taken everything, including the tape recordings of the conversations that Ross and the Kowalskis had during their time together. The lawsuit that Steve filed against Bob Ross Inc. was unsuccessful, and it was dismissed in June of 2019. Prior to the end of his life, Ross had completed approximately 30,000 paintings. Despite the fact that a great number of other artists have produced notable works that are deserving of praise, Ross's accomplishments are noteworthy. In spite of the fact that Ross has an unusually high number of original paintings, his paintings are almost never found in the art market. Instead, they are typically purchased before the news of their availability emerges in the market. Ross's paintings have never been sold in major auction houses because he is adamant about preventing his work from being exploited for financial gain. This is the reason why his paintings have never been sold. The rights to a significant number of the paintings that Bob Ross created during the time that the show The Joy of Painting was broadcast are still held by Bob Ross Inc. A volunteer at the station purchased his first painting, which was titled A Walk in the Woods, for approximately $100. He then hung the painting on his wall for a period of 49 years. The painting, on the other hand, has recently been appraised and given a price tag of $9.85 million. It is one of the few paintings that he created that is not owned by Bob Ross Inc. An art appraisal service has described Bob Ross's artistic style as a hybrid of fine art and entertainment memorabilia. This is despite the fact that Ross was a very well-known artist. His work, which stands in stark contrast to that of other traditional artists, is most frequently sought after by fans of the show, as opposed to wealthy collectors who prefer more seasonal pieces created by other artists. Because of this, his work is highly sought after. However, the only paintings that Bob Ross owns that are still in the possession of collectors are those that were sold during the show and the ones that he painted before the show, which Bob Ross Inc. does not claim ownership of. We appreciate you watching. For more videos just like this one, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to our channel.